quiet transformation is unfolding, and it's not coming out of Washington, it's coming out of Ottawa. Prime Minister Mark Carney's Asia tour has just concluded, and observers are calling it a defining moment for Canada on the world stage. From Kuala Lumpur to Tokyo, world leaders didn't just see another Canadian Prime Minister. They saw a statesman, one whose words carried weight far beyond our borders. For decades, Canadian diplomacy was known for being polite, steady, and predictable. But this week, that image changed. Carney turned what could have been a routine foreign tour into a statement of strength, showing that Canada's leadership is no longer defined by how closely it stands to others, but by how confidently it stands on its own. And just as the world praised his calm authority abroad, Carney demonstrated that same composure at home. When he addressed the controversy surrounding Ontario's anti-tariff ad, he didn't escalate, he didn't politicize, he chose diplomacy, proving that Canada's strength doesn't come from volume, but from vision.
So let's start with Prime Minister's trip to Asia, attending ASEAN, APEC, and pledging to transform Canada's economy as he engaged with these large economic groups. What did the Prime Minister achieve, you think, Tom?
Well, actually, I think that you're right to put those two together. His trips, of course, were part of a pattern of meetings that are held annually. Canada's place there has been earned over the years. We have trade deal with many of those countries in the Asia-Pacific region, and we're considered reliable partners by most. And at the same time, Carney is trying to signal to the Americans that we have other options around the world. I think that Canada is starting to realize that overall we made a mistake in putting ourselves in lockstep with the Americans. You put all your eggs in one basket, and then you have a Trump who just decides to throw the basket on the floor, then you're in trouble. And that's where we are right now. So I think that Carney is showing the depth of his connection around the world, his experience, the respect that people have for him. That works out very well in Canada's favor.
For years, Canada was seen as a supporting actor on the world stage. Reliable, steady, but rarely the one setting the tone. That perception changed this week. At the ASEAN summit and during his subsequent visits across Asia, Carney made it clear that Canada is no longer content to watch history unfold. It's ready to shape it. He spoke about digital innovation, green technology, and new trade corridors linking Canadian industries directly with Asia's fastest-growing economies. The reception was unmistakable. World leaders listened, not out of courtesy, but out of respect. That's the shift. Canada is being heard, because Carney's leadership has made it impossible to ignore. For decades, our foreign policy revolved around Washington. Every trade move, every diplomatic stance, all filtered through the lens of American interests. But Carney is rewriting that playbook. He's sending a message to the world, and especially to the United States. Canada no longer needs permission to lead. His Asia tour made that clear. By meeting with Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, and China, Carney positioned Canada as an independent player, building direct partnerships with major global economies without going through Washington first. As one analyst put it, this is a Canada that learned from the Trump years and refuses to be caught off guard again. Carney understands that lesson better than most. When you rely too heavily on one ally, and that ally decides to walk away, you're left with nothing. This trip made one thing clear: that era is over.
He's also signaling to the Americans that we're going to get closer to China. Now, I think that one of the first things that will happen is that Canada will start lifting the ridiculous 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. That's something that we did to please the Americans almost exactly a year ago. And the Americans were putting 100% tariffs to try to squeeze the Chinese out of the electric vehicle market. All of a sudden, this favor to the Americans got us nothing but grief and tariffs and punch in the head from Donald Trump's regime. So Canada is simply saying, look, if you're going to play the game that way, then we do have other options.
Carney's rise as a global statesman didn't happen overnight. He built it through steady, pragmatic diplomacy, the kind that wins allies quietly but powerfully. Throughout his Asia tour, Carney wasn't chasing headlines. He was securing partnerships. He met leaders who, not long ago, saw Canada as a secondary voice in global trade. Now, they see him as a strategic bridge, a Western leader who brings logic, credibility, and stability into every room he enters. Behind closed doors, Carney discussed energy cooperation, digital connectivity, and climate-focused investment. But beyond policy, what truly stood out was his approach: polite, principled, yet unafraid to speak with authority. That's what separates Carney from leaders like Trump. Trump tries to dominate the conversation. Carney earns it. While Carney's trip was winning praise abroad, an entirely different headline broke back home, one that stunned both Ottawa and Washington. Carney had personally apologized to Donald Trump for the anti-tariff ad aired by Ontario's government, an ad that mocked U.S. trade policy and further strained relations. At first, it seemed unnecessary, maybe even surprising, but those who understand diplomacy recognized it immediately, a stroke of strategic brilliance.
Now, Prime Minister Mark Carney says he apologized to Trump for the ad, saying he disagreed with Ontario's Premier Doug Ford about airing it. But Trump has called off all trade talks with Canada, and it's unclear if and when talks could take place in the future. For more on all of this, let's now bring in CTV News political commentator and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair in the conversation. Tom, great to see you this Sunday afternoon. Thank you for your time. Lots to catch up on.
Carney knew that ad had already served its purpose. It had exposed how Trump's tariffs were hurting American consumers, but to keep defending it would only deepen tensions. And Carney wasn't about to let someone else's political stunt derail future negotiations, so instead of doubling down, he rose above it. He took responsibility, not because he was wrong, but because he was wise enough to de-escalate. That single act changed the entire narrative. Carney wasn't the aggressor, he was the adult in the room. His apology wasn't a sign of weakness. It was proof of maturity and foresight, the kind of leadership Washington hasn't seen in years. He knew his job wasn't to win arguments, it was to protect Canada's long-term interests. By acknowledging that the ad went too far, he opened the door to renewed talks with the U.S., talks that could lead to fairer, more stable trade for both nations. Even critics agreed the move worked. As Tom Mulcair noted, Mr. Carney was right to apologize to Trump. He explained that it hurt Canada, and that's exactly what a real leader does. Because Carney doesn't act to impress anyone. He acts to protect Canadians' interview.
And I think that Mr. Carney was right to apologize to Trump. He didn't try to deny that he had apologized when Trump talked about it. And he explained why, that it's hurt Canada. And so, yeah, the insult to injury, of course, is to hear Scott Bessent throwing even the Blue Jays into the mix today. But, we'll get past that sort of childish behavior on both sides. And I think we'll be able to sit down. There's no negotiation right now, but they are still talking, whatever they want to call those talks. So I think we're moving along faster than anybody wants to admit.
What Carney showed this week, both in Asia and in his handling of the Trump issue, is what true leadership looks like, he reminded. The world that diplomacy isn't about dominance. It's about direction. He chose strategy over spectacle, calculation over chaos. While Trump measures power by the noise he makes, Carney measures it by the alliances he builds. Every word, every handshake during his Asia tour reflected a quiet confidence, the confidence of a leader who doesn't need to shout to be heard. That's why world leaders are praising him, because they see in Mark Carney what modern diplomacy desperately needs: clarity, respect, and vision. This tour wasn't just about Asia. It was about redefining Canada's global purpose. Carney is positioning Canada as a bridge between divided powers, a steady voice in a world ruled by ego and division. He's proving that Canada doesn't need to choose between Washington and Beijing. It can work with both without bowing to either. This is the diplomacy of balance, something Trump could never master. Where Trump sees transactions, Carney sees relationships built on credibility, patience, and long-term vision. That's the difference between politics and statesmanship. Mark Carney's Asia tour wasn't just another foreign trip. It was the culmination of Canada's quiet revolution. By apologizing for a provincial misstep while strengthening ties across Asia, Carney showed that Canada leads with conscience, not confrontation. In a time when global politics is often defined by chaos, Carney's calm leadership has made Canada the country everyone wants to talk to, and the partner every major power wants to work with. Because when others act out of ego, Canada acts out of principle. And that's why today, the world is listening. The world is watching Canada differently now. Subscribe to Economic View for in-depth stories, analysis, and insight on this new chapter in our nation's history.